Alli is going to talk about some new feature within automations inserting as JSON. What does that even mean? Or JSON. I've heard people say, who's this JSON guy?
My old colleague, counterpart at Gagel's, his name was Jason, and so whenever we'd talk about JSON, we'd be laughing about it because our conversations would get confusing. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let me open this up. Amazing. All right.
There we go.
Perfect. So let me move you guys over to my other screen so I can still see you. Okay. So I'm going to use a use case of collecting feedback from people that attended an event. So we'll set up a Fillout form, a very simple one, and it'll populate these two tables, submissions and scores. Let me make this a little bit smaller. This was possible to do before, but now it's a little bit easier and it's going to be more reliable with this insert as JSON option. And I'll go through what it helps with and why it's useful, and what the problem was previously as well. So let's actually just start with a little bit of the schema. Super, super simple here. And I had to clean it up. I reworked it a little bit. We have events, we have people, and then we have submissions. So people are submitting scores about the event. And each one of these submission records is just like a holder. So it's like the holder of each of the scores that the person submitted. So I want to send out one form, but I want to collect on different lines. If I actually group this instead by submission. Clearly, did I do something wrong here? Interesting. Let me go back. Oh yeah, there is. Yeah, I only just have one. I had Claude generate fake data for this, so there's only one score. It looks like per. Regardless, I want to be able to have each line or each category be on its own line. So that way, when I have my dashboard, I can, filter it by type, by event, by submitted by, and still I can get an average across all of that accurately. And I won't have to be able to, I won't need to be able to have separate fields. That's like average score ambiance, average score food, average score service. It's just easier to set it up this way for reporting purposes, and it just looks nicer, I think. So there's a lot of advantages to that, but let's talk about what this JSON is. So I'm going to open up automations and we'll get this started. My first thing here is I want to actually set up my trigger. And in my case, I'm going to use when webhook received. This is a little bit more of the setup beforehand, but I'm going to throw together this really quick fill-out form, which I have pointed at my submissions table, and it's going to create a new record on my submissions table upon submission. So we're going to go edit. I'm just going to throw in the event submitted by, and then I'm going to actually throw in other fields. So the cool thing about Fillout, this is kind of like a demo of other things you can do in Fillout, which is I find super, super helpful. You can connect these fields to Airtable, right? So that's connected to my event field. I go to submissions, my event field here, and then my submitted by is this as well. I'm going to skip over the whole, privacy issue with the submitted by field being exposed. If I were doing this full build, I would actually, go through the means of hiding it and whatnot. But let's assume that everybody's okay with seeing everyone in this dropdown for now. I don't want to send out one individual form per score because that's annoying, and I don't want my users to be annoyed. So I'm going to send out one form, and I'm going to have 3 different questions on that form. Let's ignore the fact that this is not scalable. I'm going for looking nice over scalability, right? Because that's sometimes more important. And what I mean by that is if I ever add a new category, like say I want to start tracking a new category, I'm going to need to go back to this form and add a new field to it to start collecting that information as well. Kind of a negative piece, but unfortunately, if you use things like this choice matrix, the data it gives you back does not work. You just can't connect it dynamically to linked records, etc. So we're going to throw in any kind of field because we can just decide what we like here. So in our case, I have a rating. That's what I ultimately want to collect as a number from 1 to 10. So I'm going to throw in either maybe a slider. So you can choose what you like. Here you could say what the maximum is. So if that was 10, 89 out of 10. You could have this, and I could be like, please rate the ambiance. And then short answer. Let's actually just say ambiance rating, ambiance notes, just to keep the names all the same.
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah. And I think I did value, no service. And we'll do one more of these. Okay. So let's publish this and just go straight to that. So obviously I could spend the time making this look nice. We're going to skip that part. But I'm going to choose an event. Interesting.
Live demos. Everyone's favorite.
Right? What's going on there? Okay. It is connected. Logic.
No filters.
Yeah.
Refresh. Wow.
What is going on? Maybe I'm not connected to the right
It worked in your editor.
It did. I think so. That's strange. Let me just delete these fields, and I'm going to delete that integration. And the cool thing about Fillout is so these fields are not connected to anything. They are just this forms field. So I'm going to leave those there, and then I can actually add a new integration. I think what happened is I had two bases that were named event ratings in JSON. I had several bases named NPS example, I think. So, and they all happen to have events and submitted by as fields. So still submissions, continue, finish, publish now. Now I'm going to add back event. All right, now let's go refresh. And Airtable being slow. There we go. So let's say for the gala, Maya says, great, loved it. And I'm going to skip service rating on purpose. And actually what I want to do here is go first into our integrate section and just talk about what that looks like. So right now, I only have event and submitted by mapped because those are the only two fields that I have connected to Airtable. I want to add in here the submission ID because ultimately what I want to do is be able to create that new record on my submissions table, and then I'm going to trigger a webhook to create all the score records that are linked to that submission. And in order to do that, I need the submission ID as part of that submission record to match them up correctly. So I'm going to do that in here, update, and I need to publish. This takes a second to show up, but there we go. And that would create the record on my submissions table. If we go and where's my form submit? So here's that new submission here. I don't have any scores linked to it yet. And this is Fillout's actual format of their submission ID. So now I need to go and actually send the data via the webhook. And this is where we get into our JSON piece. I'm going to actually go out of my integrations. So I'm back on this screen and I can add additional integrations in addition to my Airtable one. So in this case, I want Webhook, and in Airtable automations, I'm going to go make sure I have this copied. And I can paste it here. Now, if I just test that, it's not going to send anything because there are no values in my form. So if I go look at what that just gave me here, there's just going to be like some things, but there's nothing really of use to me here. However, there will be when there's actual submissions. So I'm going to go back into here, and the easiest thing to do, ironically, I think, is to use the advanced tab. And in this, we can map the fields that we want. But actually, you know what? I'm just going to try it with this and just use the whole thing as JSON now, because we can do that now. And that might actually be more useful. So let's do that. So I'm going to just say finish setup here and publish. And then I'm actually just going to go refill this out again. Do a different one. Let's just leave a few blanks. Okay, so that should have given me more information. So here's my actual values from the submission. So previously, what is frustrating about this, about Airtable's scripting action in particular, is that if any of these values were empty, you had them mapped to something in the script, it would just error. Like there was no way around it. Like if it were empty, instead of just being a null value and being fine, it would just be like, sorry, we can't continue forward at all. And so that's what the benefit is of using the full thing as JSON. So if I open up this script, action here, let's just say JSON. And here I can say insert as JSON data, or I could, and this is what it was always before, is I could actually dive into this JSON tree here and say, okay, all of my submission data, I'm relying on the questions. Let's see. The value. There was like no way to get this out without being able to use the JSON data unless you mapped it. That's what there's a distinction with this Fillout specifically is under the advanced tab. If you map it to the parameters that you want, then you can always rely on them being in the same place. But if they were empty, they still would cause a problem. So now I can actually just grab all of the questions. And in this case, I'm trying to think through how I want to do it. Let's see. I want to do that. I almost want to map them in Fillout because it's better. It's better to map them in Fillout ahead of time because I only need those questions, those answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I should do that. I'm just going to do it really quick, which is here. It would be like score ambiance, score food, score service, notes. And then I need the submission ID. I think that's really it. So ambiance rating, food rating, service rating, ambiance notes, food notes, and submission ID. That. Now if I submit,
But yeah, if you're using scripting, you could put the whole thing in there and then parse it in your script.
Yeah.
You can, yes, absolutely. It's just with Fillout specifically, it can get like the way they have it. I find it easier to just pull out the ones that I want, and then what I'm still going to use the full JSON here because if I didn't,
there you go. Yeah, that's a much easier object.
Exactly. Like now I'm only dealing with what I want, right? This is just the data I need to deal with. But I left note service empty on purpose so that we can see in here if I were to map this. To that, and just if I try and use that and then run it with a submission that's empty, it will not work. It would error.
I think it would still work because it's still in the post.
Yeah, the main problem is when you have missing keys or impermanent keys. So if note service wasn't part of the payload at all, not just null, just it wasn't included, that's a definite error. And then whether or not it errors and what you've done here, it kind of depends on what you do with it.
Well, even if there is maybe I'm not hitting the like exact place where it would error, but there is a place that like I'm not articulating correctly where.
Well, you're correct. Probably the find record step, because that hates null values. It has a very hard time of saying has any of null. For whatever reason, it freaks out instead of just saying returning nothing or returning anything. I would take either of those over an error, but that's just me.
Sometimes I'll have a webhook that comes from two different sources, and I might have like a mode value that specifies like where it came from, and the schema is maybe a little bit different, and I have to make sure both sources have all the same keys, even if they're not used, so that it doesn't error.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Exactly. So now I can take this and I could split it across those records. And
okay, now what's interesting is it actually comes in as an object. I was thinking it would come in as a string and you had to do JSON parse.
So for all other steps, it comes in as a string that is JSON formatted. But for the run script action, it does say insert as JSON data versus insert as JSON string. So it does tell you that it is going to come in as like a full object, which means whoever's sending you webhooks, make sure that they're formatted correctly, because if it's not proper JSON, this is going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
No, exactly. So yeah, now we would be able to then map that. And actually, I wouldn't even need a script step for this because I could just, the reason why I would use a script step for this is if I name everything appropriately, what I could actually do is like write a loop over all of these parameters, except for like take submission ID out, and then dynamically create however many sets of scores and notes I have. So that way I don't need to edit the script every time.
Mhm.
I'm not going to spend the time doing that via this, just to leave time for Camille's demo as well. But the way that this inserts all of the data at once affords you further scalability without needing to like worry about it erroring if there's something empty, as long as you write your script the correct way.
And my least favorite part of the script action and automations is the putting in inputs. You only need one input.
Yeah.
Just give me the data from the webhook and I'll write my variable names myself, rather than this very fiddly one input per field that's coming from your form, which is harder to maintain.
Exactly.
And remember, this is the thing that Claude can't do yet. So while we're in this interim period where you can build automations except for scripts, make the script part easier on all of us. Just do one input and then parse it yourself inside the script. You're using a script anyway.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So instead of having to go through and do one of these for each one, I can just do this one with all the JSON. And then, like I said, like write some code to just, as long as I name all of my parameters the same in a trustworthy way, then I can never have to update the script and only update the form, which would be the way that I'd probably approach doing something like this. But the first thing you would actually do in this would be to find the submission ID record, so you can link them all up together.
Now, does it, this is more a fill-out question, is it sequential where it will create the record first and then call the webhook, or does it do like both at the same time? So it's possible the webhook got there before the create record.
Very good question. And I actually thought about that as I was setting it up today, because I've done this a million times. I believe it is sequential, that the create record is like, you can't drag them. But if it's set up to create a record, I believe that happens first. I actually don't know if they have that documented though.
And Alli, I'm less familiar with Fillout, but I know they have workflows. So I can imagine a scenario where the form itself creates a record in Airtable, and then I'm imagining like you make a workflow that's like, well, when it's done doing that, then fire this webhook as like a potential. And then yet another way to do it technically, I guess, is if you have it so that it's still pulling data from Airtable, so you can get that drop down of events and people. But if it doesn't create the record at all, it only sends the webhook of what someone submitted. You can make the automation create the submission and then create. So you can force it to be sequential if Fillout is not inherently sequential in that way.
100%. And what it also, I don't know about the workflow. I haven't tried workflows yet, but I got distracted by looking at something else. The order in which these happen, I've never actually had it misfire out of order. Like, I've never had the webhook go before the record is created. I wish they had it documented though. I don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't actually see it anywhere.
If, I bet that they are sequential, because or like they both trigger at the same time. because I don't think you can use info from your create
You
record
can't.
in the webhook.
Um,
Yeah, so that's more
well,
flow.
what's really cool though that you can do, you can get fancy with this. So you can put a few things. First, you can do a conditional filter on any integration here. So you can say only run this if one of the form answers is X or Y, whatever. Like you can add conditions here, and they have condition groups, which is great. Then you can also, if you set this up to update a record, which I wouldn't for this use case, but in this case, they let you do, and I don't think I have, this is not the right form plan level, but they have a prefetch feature. So if you are updating a record in a particular database, for example, and you need information that's in a different table or a different database that's related, you can go fetch that information before the user even sees the page, which is really cool. And then you can use it in your everything else. What you can't do is get the ID of the record that was created. Like that's something that I have often yearned for. That's why I'm using the submission ID here instead, to be able to match the scores, because otherwise, like, that's something that Airtable does. If you use a redirect from an Airtable form, you can use like squiggly record underscore ID squiggly to like use that as a placeholder for the ID of the record that the form created. You cannot do that in Fillout, to my knowledge.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good example of both Fillout and the power of JSON. And that's a nice addition. You can also do it. Yeah, there's other places where you can insert as JSON, like you were mentioning, like as JSON string. So if you want to like update a record.
The one thing I'm curious about is the repeated action group in an automation can take any array. It doesn't have to be from a find record step, although that is the most common, I think, use case. Since JSON has arrays in it, I do wonder if the webhook, like, if you could, never mind. I've talked myself out of it. You could already do that. It's not affected by the insert as JSON because it comes in already as an object from the trigger, which means if it's an array in the trigger, you can loop over that. So in this case, not all that relevant, but it is like just a reminder of it. Let's say your JSON wasn't formatted in the array that you want. You can plug it into the script very easily, map it however you need to get the array that you want, and then use that in additional steps afterward.
Right. That's kind of where I was headed with like the naming, like mapping this from an object into an array of those pairs for the score, notes.
Right.
Yeah, and that's how I wish it could be mapped when it came out of Fillout. That's like where I was like, okay, if I had the matrix, but like something like that. But yeah, I digress. I could go on and on.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. We'll move on and get to double dip today on 2 new features. Now, Camille is going to walk us through MCP automations. Your screen up. No.